Dialogue, KSFR's Friday evening talk show where the conversation starts with you. I'm your host, MK. Today, I bring you one of my absolute favorite guests in the history of this show. He brings us a rare, bold, and candid view as a former insider of the mental health system. His name is Daniel Mackler. He's an author, world traveler, filmmaker extraordinaire of 1 million views and counting, as well as a former therapist for over a decade. He decided to give it all up and is now an avid and world-renowned advocate for reform of our mental health system. His voice is both refreshingly honest as well as compassionate. His wisdom, simple and straightforward, yet critically necessary and courageous. His tell it like it is, former insider's critique begs the question of whether the current mental health paradigm is doing more harm than good. From the psychiatric model to the psychological and therapeutic one, he highlights the role of shame, the counterproductive effects of mandated treatment, how power dynamics play into and against the therapeutic process for individuals and their families. The next generation's visionary, Daniel Mackler. Daniel, are you there?
I'm here.
All right, well, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Nice to be here, Mende.
Yay. So we talk about mental health a lot on my radio show. And what we look at is the idea of kind of alternatives in mental health care and how the current system is just not working. And I'm very curious to hear your feedback on that. You were a therapist for also 10 years and then got out of that. Can you talk a little bit about your critique of therapy and why you decided to get out?
Oh, why I decided to get out? Oh, well, I loved it for a long, long time. I actually loved it even right up to the end. It was just so exhausting. And largely I was working alone, without colleagues, without team members. I didn't work in any systems. I just worked in private practice. And that was by choice because in my first few years of being a therapist, I did internships and worked at clinics and even did an internship in an inpatient unit. And I didn't like it. I just felt, I hate this system. The system is horrible. But I loved being with people. Yeah. In a closed room where there was confidentiality, where there was privacy, where I could really be working for them, working for their growth processes. And what I found a lot in the mental health system was that was not the point. And what I felt from a lot of my colleagues was they were not in it for that. They may have thought they were in it for that, but they were in it for all sorts of other reasons that I found distasteful and pretty much contrary to why I came into the field. And a lot of times I felt they really weren't helping their clients. They weren't really trying to find out what their clients really wanted. Instead, they were imposing a lot of things onto them. And this became much more extreme when you got people who were in more serious levels of crisis, people with kind of more extreme problems. And that's where it's like, I realized I hated the mental health system in general. And yet, in therapy, I found privately, I could still be useful to a lot of people, regardless of their level of problems. But what it required with me working alone was that there was a lot more burden on my shoulders, a lot more responsibility. And considering the amount of work I was doing and the fact that I wasn't charging a huge amount of money, to be able to survive and live in New York City, I had to see a lot of people. And I was busy a lot. I could hardly take vacations just because of the responsibility that I felt. And I got exhausted. I wouldn't say exactly that I burned out, but it was just too much. And at a certain point I realized I need to have more of a well-rounded life than just being a therapist for 30 or 40 hours a week. And that 30 or 40 hours a week that I was sitting with clients was just the time I was with them. Then there was the other probably 30 or 40 hours a week that I was just reflecting on what happened in those sessions, whether I was consciously reflecting by like writing in a journal or perhaps talking about it with people that I trusted, like supervisors or maybe a couple of colleagues that I really liked, or just spontaneously having thoughts come into my mind about what had happened in those sessions and how I could be more useful and what it was bringing up for me. It was really a huge dedication. So I felt like it was literally an all-encompassing job that really was more of a mission than even a job. And I thought, given also how much I was working in contradiction to the traditional mental health system, I found that very stressful. And I found it like, once I did finally leave, and it took a while for me to taper down my practice and eventually leave, it was a great relief. It was actually awesome to leave and to, in a way, start a new life. But it was also very sad because I had to say goodbye to a lot of people that I really cared about. And also I felt pretty guilty. I felt like I was letting a lot of people down. And that's another thing I thought. If I became a therapist again, my God, I would never want to quit. It's like, let them quit when they've completed the process that they want with me. Let them move on. I don't want to ever have to, like, drop clients, abandon people. It was a horrible feeling. I think for quite a few people, it was a replication of their historical abandonments. And that's not a nice feeling. That's certainly not why I came into being a therapist, was to abandon people. So all in all, it was pretty mixed. I got to have a lot more freedom in my life, but it was bittersweet.
Yeah.
I don't know if that exactly answers your question. I kind of went off there, but
no, totally, absolutely. And I'm also curious about what do you think was wrong with it? When you said, well, you felt like you actually hated the system. What about the system did you hate, and what did you think was so destructive or counterproductive? Maybe those are too hard of words for me to use. I'd rather have you use the words you prefer to
sure.
use.
Oh, those are fine. Well, I would say I come at saying I don't like the mental health system from, right off the top of my head, I can think of 3 different angles that I come from. The first is by having been a therapy client. I was in therapy, well, by the time I became a therapist, I'd seen 4 different therapists. And I didn't like any of them. And I don't think any of them really liked me. And I don't feel any of them were helpful to me. And I feel each in their own way was destructive to me. And the first one I was forced to go to when I was a kid. And I cannot stand that person that I went to. She was horrible.
And how old were you, if you don't mind me?
I was 13. You can ask anything you want. I was 13. I was forced to go for fighting in school. And it was all about threats. She just threatened me. She never asked me anything about myself. She didn't care. She was mean. It was all just like, if you don't do this, this is going to happen to you. And she was a psychologist. And it's like, where was she trained? She never asked about my trauma. She never asked about my abuse history. My dad was bullying me. I'd been bullied in school. I was unpopular. I didn't have friends. I was a small kid. I was trying to sort of regain my emotional equilibrium by acting out.
Totally.
And I was kind of bullying some other kids. I wasn't being very nice. And it was because I was in such pain, because I was replicating what had been done to me. And all she saw was that I was acting out. And her whole way of dealing with it was negative reinforcement and punishment. Like, if you do this, this is going to happen to you. And it was like she was threatening me with really shameful, humiliating stuff. And so basically, I had been shamed, I had been humiliated, I was acting out by trying to shame and humiliate other kids. And I felt ashamed about doing that because I still had a lot of myself in there, and I just was acting out unconsciously because I didn't have a better way to deal with my problems, my pain and my traumas. And her response to me acting out my shame and my humiliation by shaming other kids, which made me feel ashamed, was to further threaten me with shame. And the whole process was shameful, being forced to go see some nasty lady who didn't care about me. So I was like, I hate therapy. I hate her, and I hate the system, and I hate the people who sent me to her. And
now, I'm just curious, but do you feel that kind of that shaming, I think that's a huge piece. Do you think that, and I think that's a reason why a lot of people actually stay away from therapy, because they're afraid they're going to walk in and just get shamed, and who wants to walk in and get shamed, right? Do you think, did you find that then happened into your other sessions as an adult, not just as the child experience, but as an adult in therapy?
It was the most extreme when I was a kid because I was being forced. I think the fact that I went as an adult, the 3 times I went as an adult, I went by choice. at least on the surface, I went by choice. I felt pressured to go all 3 times, actually, as an adult. But it wasn't like anyone was forcing me. I was forced to go as a kid. And I think the force itself, it flipped a switch in my mind where I was like, force and mental health are an oxymoron. You can't force people to do this stuff. This is bad. This creates real problems. And I saw it as an adult because I did work with some people who were forced to go. I had some clients that were mandated to come to therapy, and I realized this is awful. This is not for me. And later, when I became a therapist, early on as an intern and in my first year working, as a licensed professional, I had some of these mandated people, mandated by children's services, mandated by parole officers. And what I realized is there's one goal for therapy when people are mandated, and that's to remove the mandate. That was my whole goal. Get rid of this mandate. If they want to keep coming, great, and if they don't want to come, goodbye, fare thee well. At least I've helped you remove the mandate. And what I found is that when people did get their mandate removed, 90% of the time they didn't want to come anymore. And it was like, and what I felt is the best thing that could possibly happen is they could realize, this system that's mandating me to come to therapy sucks, but at least I got a therapist who empathizes with me. And they realized, that I cared about them and that I was helping them get out, because nobody who's mandated to go to therapy actually wants to go. They may get something out of it, and I feel some of them actually did get something out of it, but primarily because I proved that I wasn't forcing them. But this is again an aside.
Yeah, but let's stay on that aside for a second, because I think that's interesting. So actually, if I was mandated and I came to you in my first session, would you say you're not mandated to come back anymore? Or would you? Once I
put the pieces together, I think the first couple of times I saw people as an intern, no one told me this, so I didn't realize it. But I think by the second, maybe third person, I figured this out. So yes, in the first session, I told people, I don't believe in forced therapy. I don't believe in you being mandated. I don't believe you're going to actually get anything out of it if you're being mandated. So my whole goal for you, since I actually they had assigned these people to me. It's not like I really had a choice in it either. In a way, I said, I'm being forced to work with someone who's being forced to come to therapy and forced to work with me. This is a bad situation, so I want to work for you. I'm imagining you don't really want to be here. So my goal is to help remove the mandate, and I'll do whatever I can to help you remove the mandate. And then if you want to keep coming, that's your choice. And if you don't want to come, then I'm on your side, and I will totally support you not coming. So how do we help you remove this mandate? And a lot of times what I felt is people engaged in therapy with the specific goal of helping remove the mandate. On the other hand, I didn't put that in their chart because I had to create treatment plans and all that. I hated treatment plans. So it's like treatment plans to me should be an organic, natural, intuitive part of the therapy, not this written thing that all this thing gets written down and measurable goals and people have to sign it. I think that's ridiculous. I'm not into that at all. But what I found is that people did engage, and I had some people who actually really engaged in therapy because they knew that I understood something very basic about how they felt, that they actually didn't want to be there.
Yeah.
But I did actually have some really lovely relationships with people who were mandated, and they actually had a lot of fun. Some of them actually got a lot out of talking with me. Yeah. And what I felt, oddly, was that some of the things that the people who mandated them to therapy wanted them to get out of therapy, they actually got because I was against the mandate. But at the same time, I also saw some of these people who mandated people to therapy were sadistic. It's like, it's not a nice thing to tell someone you have to go to a complete stranger and talk about your most personal stuff. It's like, why would someone do that? That's not a nice thing. And I've seen all sorts of lesser versions of that. Like, I see parents say to their kids, you really need to go to therapy. You need to go to deep therapy to work out your problems. That's a kind of mandate in a way.
Yeah.
And teachers telling kids, you're really acting out. You need to go talk to someone. When someone says you need this, that's kind of a mandate. And one thing that I got as a therapist, it's a little pithy little statement for me, is nobody needs therapy. Therapy is not for people who need it. Therapy is for people who want it. Because therapy is not a need. People need human connection, they need love, they need caring, they need to be listened to, they need to be talked to. But a lot of times therapy isn't that. So when people say you need therapy, I consider that an insult. I've been told that too. You need therapy. You need to talk to a therapist. It's like, screw you. I don't need that. Maybe I need to talk to someone. Maybe I want to talk to someone. But I don't need this, and nobody needs it. So I was never supportive when people. I mean, I did some family therapy too. I did a lot of couples therapy, and I heard people say to people in their families. I heard people say to their partners, and in therapy with individuals, I heard people say, "Oh, my boyfriend, my girlfriend, she needs therapy," and I always said, "No, I don't think she or he needs it. I think therapy is there for people who want it. You're here by choice. Nobody's saying you need it. I don't say you need this. It's like you're here if this works for you, and if you don't want it, then I'm not going to say you need it. I also think a lot of therapists do that. When their clients don't want to be there anymore, their clients say, I don't feel I'm getting so much out of this anymore. I think I want to leave. The therapists often, they take off their sheep's clothing, and underneath it is the wolf who says, well, I actually think you need more therapy. I don't think you're ready to quit yet. ... And that's really screwing with somebody's mind, and I really don't like that. And I've had that happen to me too. I've had therapists really put up a lot of resistance, but I don't want to be there anymore. And it's like, wait a second, don't tell me what's good for me. And that's not to say that people can't see sometimes what is good for somebody else, but and sometimes I felt as a therapist, I felt that I could see what would be good for somebody else, but by and large, I refrained from telling people, because even if I'm right, it's pretty insulting to tell people what's good for them. It's like, let people figure it out for themselves. And I feel when people feel respected, they get a lot more out of the therapy process. And a lot of the mental health system in general is about telling people what's good for them, what's in their own best interest. And very quickly, that can spiral out of control into mental health professionals deciding what's best for people and then forcing them to do it. And when you get people, especially who have a lot of more serious problems and maybe more out of control in their lives, a lot of times the mental health system can come right in, swoop in, and take total control of their lives, lock them up. Can be even worse than prison. And so I'm against that.
So let's talk about that, how that's worse than prison, and how and why do you think that's worse than prison? Sort of like the idea of getting locked up against your will, right? That's what you're referring to, I'm assuming, but...
Yeah, well, let's say this. I've actually visited some prisons, probably more than I realized. I've visited quite a few prisons in a lot of different countries, actually. And I don't like prison. I'm actually against the whole prison system, too. I think it's based on a lot of really faulty things that aren't really helpful to people, especially this lie in the United States that it's called the corrections system. It's like, well, is it that, or is it just like keeping people locked up and it's a punishment system? But
yeah, language is very interesting. How we use language and how we twist language in this country is a rather interesting thing. I mean, anyway, it's quite manipulative, but I have to say I'm not sure that it's unintentional at all.
No. But I'm
anyway,
trying to think that question of why it's worse in the mental health system.
Yeah.
Well, in the mental health system, it's like a lot of the people locked up in psychiatric units haven't done anything that's against any laws. They've just behaved differently. They've behaved oddly sometimes, or sometimes they've just bothered people. Maybe they've bothered people who deserve to be bothered even sometimes.
Yeah, or maybe got caught doing something that everybody else is doing, even 10 times more so, but they just happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time and boom, got caught, I mean...
or said something that was considered societally inappropriate, but didn't necessarily violate anybody else's rights, didn't necessarily violate society in any harmful way, maybe just violated some social norms. A lot of times that was it. And they get their rights taken away.
Now what about the people who would argue and say, well, no, hold on, we have very stringent rules. We only put people away against their will if they're a harm to themselves or others. I mean,
well, I would say go read the Rosenhan's experiment. That's what I would say to those people.
And explain that for people who don't know.
Okay, the Rosenhan's experiment was a psychologist named Rosenhan's. I can't remember if it was in the 60s or the 70s, but he took a bunch of psychology graduate students, and his experiment was to see what would happen to psychology graduate students who followed this very strict protocol. What they were supposed to do is not shower for a few days. I think they were trying maybe not sleep for a night before they went in, dress kind of in a disheveled way, don't brush your teeth before you go in, and go to a psychiatric emergency room or just an emergency room and say, all you say is, I'm hearing a voice that says thump, and see what happens. And they were all locked up against their, and these were people who were psychology graduate students, and everything else, aside from the fact that they were participating in this experiment, they were supposed to tell the truth. They were all locked up, they were all given serious diagnoses, and I believe a lot of them were given medications, and none of the mental health professionals picked up that these people were completely 100% faking it. They just didn't have any sense that these people were faking it. And the only people that consistently picked up that these psychology graduate students were not in mental distress, they were just completely faking it, were the other patients. The other patients were immediately clued in that these people weren't really in psychological crisis, they were faking it. But the mental health professionals couldn't discern it. And so they were locking up these people who were faking it.
And apparently they didn't really play that role beyond the first statement of just getting themselves in, right? They didn't continue the faking it once they were locked up. They just acted normal.
And so he published these results, this Rosenhan's fellow. He published the results, and there was massive pushback from the mental health field, from psychiatry, psychology. They said, we don't believe it, BS, do it, and if you do this again, and so many big shot mental health professionals came out and said, I would have caught these people, guaranteed. You send these people to my mental institution, we'll catch them. So what they did is they said, okay, we're going to do the experiment again, and they chose a few specific hospitals, and they even told the hospitals that they were going to do it. They did the experiment again, and the hospitals locked up quite a few people, and they caught, I can't remember how many fakers it was, but I'm just going to say an arbitrary number. Let's say they caught 20 fakers, and they said, see, we caught 20 people. And the joke was, Rosenhan's played a joke on him. He says, okay, you caught 20 people who were faking it by saying they were hearing voices. Well, guess what? We actually didn't even send anyone the second time. There was nobody sent. We didn't send anyone. And this time they caught 20 people who were fakers, but they actually weren't fakers. So the 20 people that they supposedly caught were actually telling the truth. They really were in distress. So it's, again, he showed them up. So the mental health profession doesn't really discriminate. And are they doing things for people's own good? I mean, what I've seen in my experience, because I didn't also share the other ways that I really, why I really was turned off by the mental health system. The second one was by listening to the people who came to my office, to my clients, listening to the horrible, horrible, horrible things that had happened to them in the mental health system, in inpatient units, in therapy with therapists, sick relationships. From the extreme down to the supposedly not extreme, but just, I could probably write 10 books on the horrible things that I heard my former clients tell me about things that had happened to them in the mental health profession. And just with my own little experiences of being in therapy 4 times, I've never been locked up, but it's just I related to it. Yeah. And it sickened me. And I was like, in general, I don't like this field. This field, mental health field does have capacity to be useful to people. I heard quite a few people. I know a lot of people who feel they've been helped by therapy, but I feel like I've known a lot more people who feel they've been harmed by the mental health system. And it's really, I don't know. It was so sweeping, and it was so consistent, so many of the things that I heard. And also working in clinics, I talked to a ton of therapists. This isn't even the third way that I heard. I realized I didn't like the mental health profession. But I have had a lot of colleagues, and listening to them talk in the therapists' lounges and listening to case conferences, I'm like, this is disgusting, a lot of what I hear. This is really awful. I should say, though, the third way that I was going to share that I really got turned off by the mental health system is both my parents were in therapy. And what I think primarily when I was a teenager is when I was really clued into it. I was like, I didn't like their therapists, and I felt their therapists didn't like me. My parents' therapists were against me. My parents were angry at me for being upset with them, for talking back to them, for being rebellious because of the abuses my parents were perpetrating on me. And my parents both used their therapists to try to control me. My dad, especially, he was more primitive. He used to come home and say how he would give his therapists analyses of me to me. And I was like, Dad, you know, I have something I'd like you to share with your therapist. I thought about it a lot. My dad would get excited because I was like, oh, Daniel really wants to listen to my therapist. I was like, you know, I want you to tell your therapist that he can kiss my ass, you know, things like that. And my dad, and his therapist really couldn't stand me. But I was like, what business did his therapist have to go analyzing me and saying that I was this and saying that I was immature and narcissistic and all this stuff? I'm like, it was horrible. His therapist wasn't criticizing my dad who was paying the bills. His therapist was just siding with my dad against me. And it's like, no acknowledgement of what was going on. And later when I became a therapist, that was very, very, very important to me. I worked with a lot of parents over my years as a therapist. And a lot of parents, yeah, they wanted me to side with them against their kids. And a lot of times, actually, not a lot of times, it was as a pretty consistent rule, I didn't.
Yeah.
And it was like, and I told the clients this, my adult clients, I said, you know, I'm going to go with the assumption that you love your child and you're out for your child's best interest, and you recognize that your child has less power in your relationship with your child than you do. So I feel, just by nature of me being a therapist, I feel obligated to side with your child over you. And I feel like if you're a loving parent, that should make sense to you. And what I was surprised, most of my clients who are parents, they got it. They were like, you know, you're right. You should be siding with my child, because they're supposed to love their children. And I think most people do. They just get very skewed in how they love their children, and they get triggered by their kids, and they end up acting out all over the place. So I felt, as a therapist, it was my job to reframe this and say, wait, here you are going off on your kid, but your kid has rights too. And I feel like in this role, as a powerful person, I have an obligation to side with the person who has less power in the dynamic, whether it's my client who has less power in a relationship with other people, or my client's child. And that's, I think I really got that because I was on the receiving end of therapists who did that horribly with my parents. And so those are three ways I just saw the mental health field can really seriously harm people. And it's a field for me to treat with a lot of skepticism. It doesn't mean that a therapist can't be good in that system, and it doesn't mean that a whole program necessarily has to be bad. It just means that they really have to be aware of this, and they really have to honor the autonomy of clients. And if they don't have my support. And in general, the system itself is so corrupted that I don't like it. I hope that was fluent what I said, but that's kind of what I'm after.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know what? Unfortunately, we have to take a small break. I don't want to break away from this conversation because it's so provocative. And this is a big part of why I wanted to bring Daniel Mackler on. That's who we're listening to, is Daniel Mackler. And you can find him at hold on, I just... Daniel,
WildTruth.net.
WildTruth.net. Thank you. And we're going to take a short break. We're going to be right back after this message.